Well, good morning, councillors and staff. Welcome to Annual Plan and Long-Term Plan Committee meeting APLTP 23/5. I wish to declare this meeting open and welcome you all. The meeting is being live streamed and you can see Councillor Daly there on our screens, is online there. I'll go to the karakia. Whakatau mai te wairua. Whakawatia mai te hinaro. Whakariti mai te tinana. Kia e ai ngā mahi. Ai.
Aye.
We do have, I believe, an apology from Councillor Sol, do we? Is that correct? Don't see him online anyway. So no other apologies. Well, I should request someone move that we accept Alan's apology. Councillor Joyce, Councillor Thwaites, all in favour? Thank you. There are no late items. Are there any declarations of interest anyone wishes to declare?
Definitely interested, sir, but no conflict.
That's great. And we have no public excluded items. We have no public forum. We have no presentations. So we can go to our first report, please. So, Matt, you're ready to present that to us?
Kia tato. So this report presents the findings from Te Wāhi Your Place is engagement feedback. So that was the engagement campaign that we ran from 30th May to 30th of June. We had over 30,000 individual pieces of feedback come through. So a huge response from the community. It's been really useful information. And this presents back the findings at a high level in a document so that the community can access it. Further work's been undertaken to break that down into the neighbourhood, the 12 neighbourhood area, so that people can look at, see what locally matters to them and the local priorities and the responses to those. Luke can probably give a bit more of an overview of the campaign if you wish, but happy to answer any questions as well.
Go to Luke if you wish to comment.
Nothing too much more than what Matt said. As said, is a month long, 12 neighbourhoods. Tried a few different things in terms of a lot of digital with community Facebook pages and Spotify and the likes, which seems to generate pretty good feedback. You'll see the breakdown in the report between website or online feedback versus social media and printed feedback. So it gives a good sort of breakdown in terms of how people are engaging with council on these topics, both those localised ones and the council topics. So as Matt said, the next steps are been pretty definitive in analysing that feedback. There's a lot there, so it'll take a little bit of time, and we're just working through that meticulously to give back to those communities exactly what the next steps are and show that feedback is valued and where that logical flow is, so we can keep people on the journey.
Thank you, Luke. If we go to questions before we come to the recommendations, Councillor Cox here.
Luke, it seemed like it was a pretty good response to me, but how does it compare to past community feedback input?
Primarily just in terms of LTPs or in general?
No, in general.
Do you have any?
I think it's the largest we've had.
Yeah, so in my time, I've done one LTP before this, and we roughly had, excuse me, 27,000 pieces of feedback 3 years ago. So we have gone up, which is great. And to Matt's point, probably the largest that we have had. And I think that's testament to the time and effort from a lot of people across council and also those community leaders out in the community to really target what matters to people out there and doing it in ways that are part of their daily lives in terms of giving feedback. So overall, a lot of work, but it's delivered some good results and we're pretty proud of what's been achieved.
Okay, Councillor Crawford.
So in the diversity of representation, how do you feel that this time round in this particular engagement has reached a greater part of our community, you know, in a diverse part of our community?
I believe so. I think probably coming back to that online platform, the community Facebook polls and pages where people kind of, you know, get their daily digest of information for their local neighbourhoods, being part of those kind of conversation threads, as opposed to bringing people to council's page or taking them away from where they typically go, has worked. And yeah, we've seen some good, you know, commentary within those Facebook pages and some feedback in terms of being grateful that we've gone to the community and being part of their interactions, which has been great. So we haven't, in this phase, pre-engagement's pretty high level. We haven't asked people of age, ethnicity, gender, etc. But we kind of, as we move through the engagement phases for the long-term plan process, we kind of build those sort of questions in to build a good snapshot of who's giving us feedback. But right at the beginning, it's just a finger to the wind to get as much feedback as possible to help you guys make informed decisions as we progress.
I think further to that, using the community leaders to help lead these 12 neighbourhoods has meant we've got into networks that we don't usually get into. So reaching other demographics. I know in Te Puke particularly, they did a really good job, and they actually went out to the Sikh temple there, and they had feedback come back in Punjabi that was then translated to go into this as well. So that those different community leaders are reaching into different networks that we don't often, or we have trouble getting into.
Right, so it seems I see no more questions. So someone willing to move to the recommendations? So moved by Councillor Henry, seconded Councillor Crawford. Does anyone wish to speak to those recommendations? In that case, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. So we could go to the second paper. So Cheryl, would you like to introduce this, please?
Thank you. So this paper is just about confirming your strategic framework for the long-term plan. So a pretty important piece of the puzzle, I guess, in terms of setting the direction for the LTP. There's two key components of it. One is confirming your community outcomes, and the other is confirming what your strategic priorities are. So in terms of the community outcomes, we're recommending that we take what was regionally previously called Council's Vision and turn that into our community outcomes with some amendments to those, which are included in the paper. And in terms of the strategic priorities, we had a workshop a couple of weeks ago where we started to kind of frame up those top 5. Since that workshop, we've tried to kind of take the direction that you provided there and kind of shape it up, I guess, around providing some clarity about what we actually want to achieve under each of those strategic priorities. We've reflected the work that we're kind of already doing in that space and any plans that we already have, like our housing action plan, our climate change action plan within that. And the LTP is really the opportunity for us to start to kind of flesh out what else we might need to do under each of those priorities. And as well as having some really clear performance measures in there so we can report against them on a regular basis so that they become a lot more relevant to the organisation and what we do. In terms of what we discussed at the workshop, what we've included in here pretty much kind of reflects that direction. There was one kind of change as we started to kind of scope out what we called at the workshop community wellbeing. We kind of realised that it was probably better to kind of call that empowering communities because that's effectively what we were kind of doing within that strategic priority. And the community wellbeing really is kind of captured in all our community outcomes. So that was probably one of the key changes. So happy to take any questions. Oh, sorry, the other thing that we did do as well is just tried to kind of differentiate between, you know, we do a lot of planning work as councils and there's a lot of stuff that we kind of do behind the scenes, but differentiate between that as well as stuff that's kind of happening on the ground so that there's a bit more visibility about things that are happening under each of those strategic priorities. So That's it from me. Happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you, Cheryl. We go to councillor Granger.
Thank you, Chair. I just wonder in point 10, sorry, 16, whether we need to add a word into number 4. We have enabling, empowering, growing and responding, and then we have well-maintained, efficient infrastructure. And I think it would read better if we put in the word providing into that one. Yeah. So that they all read the same tense. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Wickers.
This is probably more a general type question and to help understanding. So moving from goals to outcomes, in my understanding, is shifting from something that we would like to achieve, and outcome is saying that we're going to achieve it. So are we going to be held responsible for the success of all those 6 things there? And that is our responsibility to deliver?
So I guess the outcomes are trying to kind of think about what that future state is. There is a legislative requirement for us to state in our long-term plan what our outcomes are, but how we go about doing that is really up to us as a council. It used to be quite prescriptive, but that's kind of changed. We're also required under the Local Government Act to show how each of our groups of activities contribute to that outcome. But it's also really clear that we're not alone in terms of working towards those outcomes. And I've kind of referenced that in the report. There's a whole range of agencies that really kind of influence our ability to achieve those outcomes for our district. We're just one of them. But within those strategic priorities, the same conversation kind of is relevant, and that, again, we're just one agency, but we're kind of just reflecting that those are things that are really, really important to us because we see that they're issues for our community. So by putting measures in place, we're at least kind of having some kind of tracking to kind of go, well, how are we actually are we actually making any movement to achieving these priorities, because they're really important for our community. So yeah, I guess kind of the short answer is there's a whole range of agencies that have responsibility for delivering on that.
Just to follow on from that, so some of those things are, like, around the infrastructure and stuff like that is well within our control to deliver, and there's, other than severe stuff, there's no reason why we should not achieve it. Where the other relationship, healthy and safe lifestyle, all those other things are in it, to me, are in a different sort of camp, and just understanding how responsible we are where there's other parties involved, that sort of the accountability back to us. Yeah, just sort of understanding that.
Yeah, and I know it's a bit hard because these things are quite kind of high level and stuff, but I guess that's where it's really important that we're really clear about what our role is. And that's what we've tried to kind of achieve in framing up those strategic priorities is, are we an enabler, are we a leader, or, what are we actually kind of doing in this space to contribute towards getting us kind of down the path in that regard. So, yeah.
Okay, councillor Cox here.
Just measuring our operational emissions and setting corporate emission reduction targets for council to assist with the climate change mitigation. How are we measuring that? Hang on. 34.
I don't have the specific detail. We've worked with Megan and Jodie's team, I guess, around kind of understanding everything that we're kind of doing in that space. So do you have...
There is an accreditation scheme that we're part of. The name slips me. I was just trying to remember. Toy2.
Oh, that's it.
I got halfway there. We're part of that formal accreditation scheme.
That was all you wished to say.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And perhaps to add, and so we work with Toy2 annually to agree our emissions targets, and there is a formalised process in place for measurement and reporting through that accreditation system.
And so I think, and with these strategic priorities, as I said, as we go through the LTP, we can shape them up a lot more, so you can understand a lot more about what we're actually already doing. And then from that, kind of understand, well, what else do we need to be doing in that space?
Councillor Murray Benge.
I like the fact that number one, you've got enabling housing and the networks that we have within our system and out in the community, I think are really so important. And do you at any stage link back to staff as to how to speed up the process?
I guess having it as a strategic priority expresses council's desire around that space. And this LTP will look at what level of investment, what roles and activities do you want to take going forward in this space? Yeah.
And talking to Jodie as well, she had kind of said that there is a dedicated project structure in place, and one of the key objectives of that is around how we can kind of speed up that regulatory process from a housing perspective. So again, coming back to Councillor Coxhead's question, you know, this is our opportunity to kind of go, okay, well, what are we actually really doing in that space, and what more could we do to achieve some of the objectives that we want to achieve?
Okay, Councillor Joyce.
A pretty good list. I just wonder, we talked quite a bit about in the workshop about resilience, and I see it does get a mention in a couple of places, but while I'm all for efficient, I wonder if number 4 of strategic priority should be well maintained and resilient infrastructure. It comes through very clearly in the community feedback as well. We talk about community resilience rather than infrastructure resilience. I know they can be considered the same thing, but I don't think anybody outside would see them as the same thing. You know, we need in this long-term plan, as I'm not alone in saying this, I know, be very focused on resilience. It's the Waihi Beach stormwater, the Makatu issues of being very close to the sea, literally. The sea's coming up to meet them. You know, resilience is a big theme for us. I would like to see it perhaps a little bit reflected, and we'll welcome your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I'm happy to put it back to you and take that guidance. I was conscious around that, and I think when we talked in the workshop, we talked about kind of weaving it through each of the priorities, which I have to some extent, but I probably could have done a bit better. But maybe, yeah, maybe it's kind of giving it a bit more prominence if we change number 4 to providing well-maintained and resilient infrastructure. But happy to take your guidance on that change.
Okay, thank you. We've got questions from Councillor Henry, Councillor Wickers. Was that another one, Councillor Murray Benge? Not well, and we've got Councillor Daly online. So Councillor Henry.
So what comment and question? So I too felt that the resilience in our, you've got that lovely photo opportunity with you with the board there. Don't you remember? That resilience was something that did weave through that, and it was a very strong message that came through from the elected members about resilience across all our wellbeing space and the housing, you know, everything. So, and just following on from Councillor Coxhead's question, so we did quite an intensive workshop, and I think we were all pretty happy with what we achieved at the end of that. But can you explain the process that you have actually gone through now? Because you did mention you've been to one of the teams. What was the process that you have gone through with this, with the operations team, to get to what you've got now, which is quite a comprehensive?
So the beauty of that workshop is you were pretty clear about what your priorities are. So that made it a lot easier for me, and kind of why. So that provided us with a really good starting point, but we didn't want to just kind of leave it at that high level. So I just spoke with key people that are involved in each of those strategic priorities to get a feel for what we're currently doing in that space and any specific plans we have. So really what that's doing is reflecting our existing mandate and our existing kind of processes and structures and things that we're doing, which is great because that should always be your starting point. What are we already doing? So they will really help for it, kind of shaping that up. And unfortunately, I probably don't have a lot of the detail, but they'll be able to add to it. But then we also wanted to be clear in this paper around your LTP as your process to really kind of refine that further. So, and to understand what do we need to be doing within this LTP? And it might not necessarily be about big investment or anything like that. It might be to do more with operational things or our work programs and how we prioritise what we do and all that kind of stuff. So what more can we do in each of those spaces to really give effect to those, because they're important to yourselves and to us. And then from that, as a next step, is around, well, how do we know that we've actually been successful? So by saying this is a priority, by saying why it's important, how do we actually kind of keep it relevant and kind of make sure that we're actually making progress in that space? So that's kind of the process. It was pretty simple because we had a lot of that info. And as I say, you gave me a really good starting point, so that was good.
So you directed that with the team, that they didn't do that on their own. You took them through that.
We just took what you said and we just kind of coordinated it with key staff. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wickers.
Hey, just a question in regard to enabling housing. It says there, we see, it's on page 30. We see our role being this leader, enabler, and then there's a section on provider, specific housing priorities are projects delivered that align with community needs identified in the local housing plans. So in that space, what my understanding, the only thing that we're providing is elder housing as far as a provider, is that correct?
Yeah, that's our principal one, but we've also been engaged with things like Kaimai Views in the past as well.
So in Kaimai Views, how are we a provider?
Over to John.
In Kaimai Views, we weren't a provider, but we, through land ownership and selling that at a particular rate to the developer, we were able to enable price point housing at a reduced rate. I think the key thing here is in terms of the enabling, it's all of the other work that we'll have very limited hands-on intervention because we don't own any land, and really if we own more land we'd be able to do more. So it's really about working across the sector to enable more housing.
So that what the Kaimai Views then would fit in the enabling rather than the providing space?
Yeah, it enabled. So we contracted an outcome, if you like.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
But essentially we contributed in providing the land at a good rate.
Yeah.
I think that correct, is it not?
Yeah, that's right. And I think we have got some we have got some other opportunities. They're pretty limited. We have you remember, I know you won't remember, but because it was done slightly before your time, councillor, but we brought a strategy up to council to say, well, where do we want to intervene, as well as being obviously a legislator and you know, zoning and those sorts of things. It was about we thought the best place for us to intervene was in the affordable housing space. So that was really about affordable home ownership and affordable rental. So there might be some other opportunities. You know, we've got some other land that we're currently looking at, and we might do something other than our elder housing, obviously. If you guys approve it. So we've got very limited, but we have got some opportunities coming up.
Okay.
Okay, Councillor Daly, could we go to you, please?
Yeah, thank you, John. Yeah, just as Rodney talked about resilience, I was looking for the raise hand button, so I could echo Rodney's thoughts exactly, and I thought, you know, we did, we're hoping to include it in the strategic priorities, and I would welcome the addition on point 4 of strategic priorities to provide well-maintained, efficient and resilient infrastructure. I'm not sure if it was just a slip, Cheryl, but you missed out the word efficient, but I think it's probably worth putting all 3 words in there, but see how it plays out with the rest of you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Grant. Councillor Murray Benge.
Thank you, sir. With growing authentic relationships with Tiriti, can you, we put 800,000 into the budget because housing is desperately needed in all walks of life in this town, in this district. And what progress are we making there?
I'll go to Rachel to comment on that, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I suspect councillor Murray Benj, you're referring to the Better Off funding. So that was a Crown funding allocation through the Affordable Waters Transition Programme. So council, yes, did make a decision that it wasn't 800,000, just slightly less. And we are making great progress, both with a consortia of iwi, a Te Arawa iwi. So we now have our project team in place. We have our tool in place that we're going to assess land blocks for readiness. And we envisage that within the next 2 to 3 months, we will have our first tranche of whenua Māori land blocks ready to proceed to development feasibility assessments. So that's particularly focused on the Te Arawa part of our rohe, our district. At the other end of in the Tauranga Moana part, out near Katikati and Tuapiro, we are working quite closely with Ngāti Te Wai at Tuapiro. They are ready to progress one of their land blocks and have already done their own extensive work, but with a little bit of support from that Better Off funding, we will be able to progress their development feasibility assessment as well. So quite pleasing progress.
Could I further ask, Mr. Chairman, knowing how difficult it is to work on Māori land with so many owners, is there a move to legislate so that only those existing who live in the area do the voting? That's been one of the issues that I think has held back Māori land development.
Chris.
Morena tātou, through you, Mr. Chair. So that proposal was something that was discussed by the former Minister Finlayson when we had the treaty workshop recently. And the idea was to create a class of owners known as engaged owners, and it would allow for those who are more closely situated around the whenua to be the ones making the decision. The reason that it didn't progress any further than that was because there were a lot of people who, although they didn't live close to their land, wanted to keep a connection to it and saw that this was something that might take that away from them. So that's never progressed any further than the idea that it was, and we still have the challenge of trying to progress the things that Rachel has just talked about with the ownership structures that we currently have through the Māori Land Court system.
I think I remember at the Elms, Chris Finlayson said that any new government might progress legislation in this direction, and he thought that that was something that had to happen.
Okay. Right, I think we have one more question here. Councillor Cox.
Just following on from that, just in terms of financing these property or these dwellings, is there any progress being made in the respect of that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the first step in any process of development of whenua Māori is actually undertaking the development feasibility work in the first instance to understand yield and likely capital expenditure that will be required to realise whare on that land. So the work that we are doing with the Better Off funding will be a critical first input to be able to approach particularly MHUD, who are the holder of significant grant funding, allocated or ring-fenced particularly for progressing housing projects on whenua Māori.
Yes, sorry, I said one more, but I'd admit it. I jumped past Councillor Granger, I'm sorry.
That's right. Councillor Coxhead's question was relevant to the last one. Before Councillor Daly came online, I'd already written down exactly the same thing in my book here as a suggestion for number 4, because I don't think we should lose the efficiency part of it and replace it with resilience. They are both important. And so in that regard, do we need to change number 3 in our recommendations or add another one allowing the CEO to make minor editorial adjustments? Because if we pass these recommendations as stated, we can't actually add those words. So,
well, I was going to go to the mayor, I think wanted to move the recommendations, so you may wish to comment in so doing, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I was indeed going to move these recommendations with the amendment to strategic priorities number 4 being providing well-maintained, resilient and efficient infrastructure.
Okay, so. Yeah, all right, it's been moved by the mayor, seconded by councillor Joyce.
And I'm doing so, I'll speak to it if I may, Mr.
Yes, you
Chairman. So look, I'm really happy with where we've landed on these strategic priorities. I think the input we've had from elected members has been really constructive and good. And I think we've landed in a good place. I also want to thank staff for putting it all together. And with that, I'm voting for the motion. Thank you.
So are there any other speakers? Councillor Murray Bench.
I like to speak to number 1 again, because housing, in this morning's paper, Peter Cooney is commenting on the difficulty for finding land in which to develop housing. And we are so restricted by State Highway 29 and State Highway 22. So our relationship with central government is really paramount to actually make sure that they get the roading networks up to speed, and they're way behind. Get them up to speed so that we can build houses in all sorts of areas. But it's so expensive here, and we can't live with that issue sitting over us, because young people are just going to go work elsewhere and build elsewhere, and so where it's cheaper. And so it's the central government issue in number 13, I think, is really quite paramount in this. And getting here this morning, you get down Cambridge Road, you come to 29, it's all backed up, and it's backed up down the road as well on 29, and you're beholden to the truck drivers who actually let us through. And so I think, sir, I just feel that one of the great weaknesses of local government at the moment is the slowness of housing development. And I must say that central government has got a major part to play. And so I just think that those people on smart growth who are negotiating at the moment with all parties in Wellington have a huge responsibility, because we can't go on like we are, being the second most expensive place in the country to build and own a home. It's just not good enough.
Thank you. There being no other speakers, I will put the recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you for that. There being no information for a seat, I will now declare the meeting closed at 10:05 a.m.